Hello, everyone. Today, I am going to make my predictions for where each team should be in the NHL. So, I'm going to come right out and say I know that this is going to be wrong from 1 to 31 for multiple reasons. One, you can never get it exactly right. There's always going to be a team that you expect to be bad that'll be really good, or a team that's really good that you'll expect to be bad. But also, I rank this on who I feel is the best teams to the worst teams, not necessarily on where they'll fall in the standings, because it's a little harder to judge uh, overall where a team will place. Well, a team like Florida is playing Detroit and Chicago 16 times total, and a team like Ottawa is playing Calgary, Toronto, Vancouver, Edmonton, Winnipeg, like all really good teams, 8 times each. So I just went with who I think is the best team, all the way down to who I think is the worst. So, getting right into it, at number 31, I have the Chicago Blackhawks. So, I'm just briefly going to go over why. Their defense is old and they haven't really fixed anything on it. And the offense, you're missing Kirby Dach, you're missing Jonathan Toews, and even though he hasn't really done much, you're missing Alex Nylander. And all those players are huge to them. And then your goaltending, there's no question it's the worst goaltending in the NHL. With Malcolm Subban and Colin Delia as your tandem, even if Lankinen comes in, it's still rough, and I can't see them possibly making the playoffs. So moving on to number 30, I have the San Jose Sharks. So I know a lot of people are actually expecting them to have a bounce back year this year because of the divisions mostly, and possibly sliding into that fourth playoff spot because it is a weak division at the bottom. But I just can't see it happening. Their defense is too focused on offense, and their goaltending is terrible. So they might score a lot of goals, but they won't be able to keep the puck out of their own net most nights. And then moving on to number 29. It is an improvement from last year, definitely. The Detroit Red Wings. So, just their roster isn't that good. I have a lot of faith in Jonathan Bernier, though, if he takes the net. And if he doesn't take the net, though, that means Thomas Greiss has been doing pretty well. And that goaltending alone, I think, could propel them past those two teams. And they have a lot of young forwards. They have Zadina, who I'm expecting to take a next step forward. Larkin and Mantha are always really good. And if this team could get any sort of success, I think that we'll see the numbers from Larkin and Mantha really start to bump up. Moving on to number 28. Bit of a controversial pick here. I have the Florida Panthers. So the Florida Panthers have pretty much underachieved every single season. And I've had them in the playoffs last year, and I believe I even did the year before. And let's see if I'm finally wrong with guessing that they'll miss the playoffs. But them being that bad, it's still not. It's third to last in the division. That's the third team in the Central that I have already out of 4. But I like Barkov and I like Huberdeau and I like Ekblad. But outside of that, there's really not much to look forward to on the team. Bobrovsky looks terrible. And if you ask me, I think that he's the reason why they lost to the Islanders in the first round. I thought that the rest of the roster actually did look pretty decent. And they lost Hoffman and they lost Dadonov, and they picked up an aging Hornquist, and they picked up Anthony Duclair to replace them, which are definitely cheaper options, but it definitely won't make up for what they lost. Moving on to number 27, I have the Los Angeles Kings. So Kings is definitely a team that could surprise and could end up higher in the standings because of what a young team they are. But I think they're relying too much on their youth. You need a good mix of youth and veteran players. And while I do know that they have Kopitar, they have Doughty, they have Quick, for this year alone, it's a little too much reliance on the kids, and you know that there's going to be some inconsistencies with them. But if the team was higher, I wouldn't be surprised. If they're lower, I wouldn't be either. But overall, the LA Kings, 27 seems fair to me. Moving on to 26. A team that I also think could surprise. The New Jersey Devils. Devils are young team, good team, I think. And whether it was the Metro, whether it was the East, it's just too good of a division for the Devils to really have much success. And the Devils are a team that I really did have to take into account the division, because I don't know if they would be much better in any other division, but in their division, there's no question that they're last. And a team that there's no question of them being last, like the teams above them, you can make an argument of them being ahead of a few teams in their division, but I feel like that they're the only team that could really be last and solid last, them and below them in that division. And they just need more development and more top-end talent. And I think that they could be a really good team soon. Moving on to number 25. And again, another team in the West Division, the Arizona Coyotes. So Arizona has gotten a lot of negative press lately. And they have been trying to move out cap space. And obviously they lost assets in the Taylor Hall trade, which didn't end up working out for them, and now he's gone. But I think that they'll be a lot better than people expect. I've seen people have them as low as last in the division, but I think people are too focused on the negative press and don't actually look at the roster. I think that the biggest piece that they lost was Derek Stepan, and I think that that is definitely something that they can get past if one of their younger forwards comes in and ends up being a good replacement for Stepan. And this is a team that I could see the possibility of playoffs, maybe. But between Arizona and number 4 in the division, I could see that going anyway. Moving on to 24th in the NHL. A very controversial pick because I've seen most people have them in the playoffs. I have the Pittsburgh Penguins. They're getting older. Crosby seems to get hurt every year. Malkin seems to get hurt every year. And Letang seems to get hurt every year. They've been lucky that it's been at different times every year. But as they get injured more and more, their talent will whittle down. And you can't rely on those 3 players forever. I know Marino looks good, but I would not be comfortable having him as my number 2 defenseman, especially not number 1 if Chris Letang happens to go down. Jake Gensel's great too, and he's a very solid number 3 option up forward. And then you don't have much after him. And on defense, a bottom pair of Cody Ceci and I'm blanking on his name, but I know they got him from Florida in the Hornquist trade, is terrible. That's arguably the worst defense tandem in the NHL. And I think that they'll take a huge step back this year. And Minnesota will be happy because they have their pick, though. Moving on to 23rd. Team that I think most people would have lower. I have the Ottawa Senators. So, yes, they are last in the Canadian here. but they got so much better in the offseason and nobody is talking about it. They acquired Derek Stepan, they acquired Matt Murray, and they acquired they acquired Tim Stutzel, and they acquired Evgeny Dadonov. Those 4 players are huge impact players on their roster. That Stutzel, if he is ready right out of the gate, could be a first-line winger. Stepan, with the roster that they have, could be a first-line center. Murray, he's your starting goalie. And Dadonov has proved in Ottawa he is a first-line winger. So it's not like that they've made small additions to build up. And on top of that, there are young players like Brady Tkachuk, and Drake Batherson, and so many more of their players are developing and have another year under their belt. I really think that this is a team that if they made the playoffs, I personally wouldn't be surprised. Yet you'll hear from a bunch of news sources, oh, we should have seen this coming, but nobody is predicting it. I could absolutely see them being a dark horse playoff team. Moving on to number 22. I have gone back and forth in this team a lot. Playoffs, no playoffs. And it's just such a tight division that they could be this low or they could be really high in the standings, like compared to the other teams in the division. But I have the Buffalo Sabres. So Buffalo added Taylor Hall. And for the most part, that's all they did. But it's another year of Rasmus Dahlin's development. It actually gives someone that Jack Eichel can play with that can produce. And I think that the blue line isn't given enough credit. I like Rasmus Ristolainen. I think that he is given less credit than he deserves. Before Dahlin came in, he was their number 1 defenseman. And while the team wasn't good, it was because he was the number 1 defenseman and he wasn't ready for a number 1D spot. I think Yoki Haru could take a step forward, and I really like what they have going on. Oh, and also adding Eric Stahl to be the second line center is huge too. And they fix a lot of their holes, and I'm a huge fan of Carter Hutton and think that he could bring a team to the playoffs. But overall, just the teams ahead of them are stronger in their division. So, and unfortunately for them, Taylor Hall doesn't have the best track record with bringing his team to the playoffs, except for the 1 year that he won the Hart Trophy. So that definitely gave them a bump down in the standings. Moving on to number 21, another team from the West Division. The final non-playoff team from them. Meanwhile, I have 1 team from the Canadian Division so far. I have the Anaheim Ducks. So, I know I'm probably going to get criticism saying that they're way too high, but they have John Gibson. And if you have John Gibson on your roster, and you're playing LA, San Jose, and if you're playing LA, San Jose, Arizona, and Minnesota, those are beatable teams for them. And I know that I'm not putting this comparing to the divisions, but if they made the playoffs, I wouldn't be that shocked because they have John Gibson. I'm a huge fan of Cam Fowler. I really like Rickard Rakell, and I'm waiting for him to break out. I really think that he will soon. And if Ryan Getzlaf had a phenomenal year soon, kind of like trying to carry the team to 1 more playoff appearance at least before he retires, which would have to be sooner rather than later, along with players like Troy Terry and Stam Steele developing well. This team could definitely surprise some people, and I think that they'll be better than people expect and just miss out on the playoffs. Moving on to number 20, I have the Nashville Predators. Duchesne is overrated, but I think people are finally starting to realize that. After that contract was signed, I haven't really heard much about him. But they have one of the best blue lines in the NHL with Roman Josi, Matthias Ekholm, and Ryan Ellis. And even Dante Fabro I'm a huge fan of, but past there, it's really not good at all. And they're really missing forward depth. Yes, they have Ryan Johansson, Philip Forsberg. Even Matt Duchene is still a top 6 player. And they have a couple players here and there that can fill in top 6 roles, like I'm blanking on his name, Victor Arvidsson. But they don't really have much, and then their depth, I think, is suffering. And while I am a fan of UC Soros, I don't know if he's enough to push them forward into a playoff spot, but he's enough to keep them competitive. And overall, though, they would need some of their young players that are looking like busts, like Eli Tolvanen, to really break out to have a very successful season. Moving on to number 19, I have finally the second Canadian team on this list, the Montreal Canadiens. They have been getting praise left and right and have been, on most predictions I've seen, either in the playoffs or just outside, but they weren't a good team last year. If the regular season went on any longer, the Devils probably would have passed them in the standings and made it to the play-ins instead. But everyone is focusing on, in those play-ins, Montreal was good. And Carey Price was good. You can't rely on Carey Price to be that good, that consistent, since 2016. And overall, though, I think the team got worse. I know that they have Romanov coming in, and I am a fan of Romanov. They picked up Joel Edmondson, which I think was an overpayment. And I'm not really sure if they needed him that much. But the blue line did get better, I will give them that. Trading Domi for Anderson now, it's a risky move, and especially with that contract they gave Anderson. And I'm a huge fan of Josh Anderson. But I don't think that trade will work out well for them. And relying on Deneau to be your first line center, and then 2 young guys in Suzuki and Kakaniemi to be the second or third line center, it's a little bit rushing the kids, I think, and it's not giving Suzuki any leeway to possibly have a sophomore slump, because that is a common thing for these young players. Moving on to number 18. This team, I feel, overachieved in the playoffs last year, and we're going to see the real team soon, the New York Islanders. So, the Islanders made it to the conference finals last year, and they lost to the red-hot Tampa Bay Lightning. But before that, they were doing terrible at the end of the season, in the regular season. And every season, they seem to get slightly worse. And I think their roster is getting worse. They lost Devon Toews especially. And Thomas Greiss is out. Ilya Sorokin is in. That's a very... that's a risky decision to make. And I don't know. I just don't see much success from the Islanders, and they're going down a hill because the roster isn't good, and Barry Trotz can only carry them so much with a defensive system. And at a certain point, the coaching isn't going to be enough. You need talent other than Matt Barzal on that lineup. Moving on to number 17. Our first playoff team on the board. From the West Division, the Minnesota Wild. They have very solid defense in Dumba, Spurgeon, Suter, and Brodin, which I think is probably the most underrated defense in the NHL. And they have some good young forwards like Eric Sinek, and Kaprizov is the big one. I think Kaprizov is going to have a huge season this year. I don't think that it'll be Calder winning, but I do think it'll be Calder finalist. But it'd be very interesting to see what this team does. And also they picked up Cam Talbot. In my opinion, a very underrated goalie. And if they can mostly split starts between him and Stalock give a little bit of an edge to Talbot, though. I think that the team will be very successful. Number 16 is up next, where I have another playoff team, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Blue Jackets would not be a playoff team if it was still the Metro Division. But the fact that they are in their division, and I feel like that the bottom of the division is very weak. Where I just don't see them having much success. Where there's 3 of the bottom teams in the bottom 4. And then you get Nashville at 20, and then a big jump from them to Columbus. They got Werenski, they got Jones. I think that blue line is phenomenal. I'm a huge fan of both Korpisalo and Merzlikins. And I think whichever one is the starter, I personally think it'll be Korpisalo, will be fine as the starter. And their defense is average. I do think Atkinson gets overrated at times because other than Dubois, they don't really have many other offensive weapons. But they are a very average team, I think. Their goaltending slightly above average, defense is phenomenal, and they have an average forward group. Which, when you get to 2C, having Domi as your second line center is a little shaky. He hasn't really shown that he could be a successful center that much. We'll have to wait and see what he can do with Columbus. Moving on to number 15. I believe that this is the final non-playoff team on the list. I have the Winnipeg Jets. Winnipeg's forward core is phenomenal. Laine, Connor, Scheifele, Wheeler, Ehlers, and Stastny is a phenomenal top 6. One of the best in the NHL, I would say. And then you get to the blue line, though. Morrissey, Pionk. The blue line isn't good. And it's been known to not be good. One of the big reasons why Hellebuck won the Vezina last year was because people knew that defense sucks. And Hellebuck had phenomenal stats. I don't think he'll be able to repeat quite that much success, and the team is going to suffer from it. It's a very good team, but if they can get Hanola into the NHL soon and he can be very good, they can be very successful again soon. But they need to get that defenseman in before Blake Wheeler goes. Because Blake Wheeler isn't getting any younger, and if he decides to retire or at the end of his contract leave Winnipeg, be a huge blow to them, and especially in the leadership aspect. I think he's the best captain in the NHL. So they need to figure out something before he's done. Or at least before he starts having major declining. Number 14, the Boston Bruins. Seen a lot of people having him first in the division, and I don't see it. That blue line was torn apart. They don't have Chara and they don't have Krug anymore, and they did nothing to replace them, which forces Grzelcyk and Carlo into top 4 roles that they might not even be ready for. And they have to find one other player like Zaboriel, maybe. But of their defense, Charlie McAvoy is the only top 4 defenseman I see. And Pasternak is injured, and he'll be out for a while. So this team would be higher without the Pasternak injury, but they won't be higher with it. And if anything, I could see some of the teams below them being better than them. I'm looking mainly at the Islanders to jump forward, or maybe even Buffalo, I could see. Moving on to number 13. I have the Edmonton Oilers. Edmonton had a very good year last year, but I believe they overachieved a bit. Their goaltending is not ideal. And Mike Smith is not that good anymore. But he's good enough to be a decent backup. And Mikko Koskinen is really not a great starter either. He had a good year last year, though. But a team carried by McDavid and Draisaitl, you can never count out. And I think Barry was a great addition for them. Turris is a great addition. I expect Yamamoto to take a huge step forward. And I expect Puljujarvi to fight for a top 6 role. But even with all that, they're still lacking in depth. And Clefbaum being injured is huge. They probably would have been higher if Clefbaum was healthy. But it's not enough depth and not good enough goaltending to be any higher. Number 12 in the standings. I went back and forth between 11 and 12, but I have the Vancouver Canucks at 12. If they had Markstrom, they could have easily been top 10. But moving to Demko or Holtby, which it's looking like so far in the regular season that it is Holtby that's the starter, but he looks good. But it's a huge drawback. And it's a hard loss to recover from with someone as good as Jacob Markstrom. But I believe in time, Demko will prove that he deserves that spot. And picking up Nate Schmidt was huge for them. I probably, if they didn't pick up a player like Nate Schmidt to shore up that blue line with the worst in goaltending, I probably would have had Edmonton and Winnipeg higher than them and had them missing the playoffs. Number 11, I have the New York Rangers to be third in the East. The Rangers got Lafreniere, and that was huge. And they really didn't change up their roster much other than that. They got rid of Mark Stahl, and they added Jack Johnson, which you could hear from my voice I am not happy about. I would trade Jack Johnson 1-for-1 for Mark Stahl last year of his contract again, if I had the choice. But it is what it is with that. The blue line is worrisome. It's a good blue line. Condre Miller made the lineup. You got Tony DeAngelo. You have Adam Fox. You have Jacob Trouba. You have Brendan Smith and Jack Johnson. Of those players, where's the defense? You got Ryan Lindgren, too, who will be in the lineup, who I really like defensively. But outside of him, Jacob Trouba is probably your best defensive defenseman, where before he came to the Rangers, he was known as an offensive defenseman. And I really hope that the Rangers' new defense coach can force a rebound year for Trouba. And I do like what I saw in the play-ins. And so far in the regular season, I like what I've seen from Trouba. So I think Trouba does help that defensive defense part of the game. But other than that, maybe Brendan Smith. But he can be shaky. Offensively, though, never count out Panarin, Zibanejad. You got Kreider, who's phenomenal. Buchnevich, who's I think is due for a breakout year. Lafreniere, who's a highly touted rookie. Capocacco could break through. Hedl and Strome will be fighting it out for that number 2 center spot. And offensively, you can't count out this team. Funny enough, other than Tampa, this is the only team to not get shut out last season, and they got shut out in their first game this year. That was pretty funny. But offensively, phenomenal. And then goaltending, Igor Shesterkin should be great. He didn't look it in the first game, but I really do think that he can be great moving forward. And if he doesn't, though, Georgiev looks phenomenal. He got a shutout in his one game. And it'd be very interesting to see where this team does moving forward. Okay, moving on to number 10. Probably would have been higher had they not had injuries, but I have the Dallas Stars. So, Dallas, they don't have Sagan. And they don't have Pavelski, I believe. And they don't have Bishop. It's time for Hintz and Goryanov to prove that they belong in the top 6. I really think that Guryanov can be an elite goal scorer in the NHL. And hence, I have seen this top 6 potential with him in every game I've watched. And most games that I've seen with Dallas, I've really thought that Hintz was their best player. And I'm very happy for him to finally get this opportunity to prove himself with probably Jamie Benn. And I really think that they will take it and run. But then it's past there. They don't really have a 2C with their 1 and their 2C both being hurt. And the defense, though, should be pretty good. It usually is with them. You got Heiskanen and you got Klingberg as your top 2. And the team is just a very good defensive team in general. But missing that high power offense, it might cause the defense to take more opportunities offensively. Maybe bump that back a bit. But that's why they're not higher on the list, even though they were just Stanley Cup finalists. And I rely on Hudobin. I think that he's a very good goalie, but he's no Bishop. I really think that Bishop would make this team a lot better. Moving on to number 9. Second place in the Canadian division, the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it's weird with me and them. I look at their roster. They have phenomenal offense. They've made their defense better, even though I do think that the player that they picked up from Calgary is a little overrated. I'm sorry, but I'm blanking on his name. And I'm a big fan of Muzzin, too, and Riley. And I'm a huge fan of Freddie Anderson. But this team always manages to disappoint. If you bank on them being first in the division, most of the time they will disappoint. If you bank on them getting out of the first round of the playoffs, they'll probably disappoint. This is the year to prove me wrong. If they still keep disappointing, they will need to trade a Nylander or a Tavares. Well, they can't trade Tavares, I think, because he has a no-movement clause. They'll need to trade Nylander and some other high-power offense, because that offensive depth is whittling away, and their bottom line now looks like an AHL looks like an AHL top line. And they really need to start proving how good they are, and that it's not all offense, and that they can keep the puck out of their own net, and they can actually win in the first round. That'll be huge this year. Number 8 in the NHL, I have Carolina Hurricanes. Very frustrating with me and them. Offense, phenomenal. Defense, best in the NHL, hands down. And then you get to the goaltending, which is why they're 8th and not top 4. If they had an elite goalie, I would argue that they could be number 1. But they don't. They have Mrazek and they have Reimer. And that alone drops them way down. Because no matter how good that offense and defense is, when your most important position is your weak point, you will be lower in the standings. Moving on to number 7 for 3rd in the West Division, after having a lot of them down low, you have the St. Louis Blues in 7th. St. Louis, they lost Tarasenko to injury. And hopefully he'll be back for next season. They picked up Mike Hoffman, though, which is a very good replacement for him. And I think that he'll slide in where Tarasenko usually plays pretty well. The defense, they lost Pietrangelo, but they picked up Krug. Losing Pietrangelo is huge. He's a high-end elite defenseman and definitely top 5 in the NHL, in my opinion. But they replaced him. They weren't going to wait around for him to say, I'm not staying, and then have nothing to go to. Boston. But overall, though, I do like that defense still. I'm a huge fan of Vince Dunn. I really think they can be a top-end defenseman in the NHL. And that forward group is really good, especially when you realize that they have some of the best defensive forwards, too. That can really make up for the lack of Pietrangelo and could really help them. And I really think Binnington will have a rebound year this year. and really put up some phenomenal stats. Going on to number 6, I have the Washington Capitals. I really think that moving to Samsonov is a huge improvement in net. And their defense, well, John Carlson is by far their best defenseman. I do think that they lack defensively a little bit. But their offense is still phenomenal. Backstrom, Kuznetsov, and Ovi as your top 3 forwards is great. And they actually do have a few young forwards that are looking pretty good. And you can never count out Oshie yet. He's still looking really good. And unfortunately, they cannot have Lundqvist as their backup, which that could very much hurt them. But they did pick up Craig Anderson, so they actually did address their backup goalie issues. And that could be huge for them. Going on to number 5, I have the Philadelphia Flyers. They got Carter Hart, who I think is a little overrated, but he's still a phenomenal goalie and is about to take that next step forward. Travis Konechny looks great. They got Claude Giroux, who's still elite. They got Voracek, Couturier, and they got Nolan Patrick finally healthy. This team looks deadly. And if they ended up first in the NHL, I would be shocked that it wasn't one of the top 3 that I have. But I wouldn't be that surprised that it was Philly that managed to be that surprise team and move that high. Because they have so many star players. And they're finally looking like that they're putting it together. Moving on to number 4, I have the Calgary Flames. And I know that it's a controversial pick. And a lot of people have them a lot lower. I've seen people have them out of the playoffs. And I have them 4th in the NHL. They fixed their big problem. Their goaltending. David Riddick was not starter material. But he's very good backup material. And now he's their backup. And they have one of the best starting goalies in the NHL in their net, in Jacob Markstrom. And I really do expect rebound years from Sean Monahan and Johnny Gaudreau. And their star players will be their star players again. And Matthew Tkachuk will keep moving forward too. And I'm a huge fan of Mangiapane, who I think will really prove to be a top 6 forward. And Dylan Dubé too. This team is scary good. And this team could be Stanley Cup contenders. Moving on to number 3, I have second in their division, the Colorado Avalanche. So, their blue line is phenomenal. You got Gerard, Graves, Taze. Oh, and I'm missing one more. Oh yeah, Cale Makar, who's phenomenal. And he's still extremely young and should still be getting better. And on forward, Landeskog, Rantanen, McKinnon, I think I've said enough. That's an elite forward group too. And their depth is phenomenal too. Their bottom end forwards and their bottom end D are fantastic. The only issue that this team has and why they're not first is their goaltending. I am not sold on Philip Grubauer being able to carry this team to a President's Trophy or a Stanley Cup. They really need a high-end elite goalie. And if they do have a chance to get somebody like a Spencer Knight or a Yaroslav Askarov in one of the drafts in a few years, they need to grab it. Because this team is young, this team is good, and all this team is missing is an elite level goalie. And I'm not sold that Francouz or Grubauer can be that goalie. Moving on to number 2. It was very hard to decide between number 1 and number 2, but I have the Vegas Golden Knights at number 2. And they picked up Pietrangelo. Phenomenal. And they worked magic with the cap to get that done. And I know they had to give up Nate Schmidt, which did hurt. But if you're getting Pietrangelo, the hurt's gone, and you're happy now. Robin Lehner is their full-time starter this year, and they have him for a full season. Phenomenal. He's much better than Marc-Andre Fleury, and he will carry them to be a better team. And Fleury as a backup will help him put up better numbers if he doesn't have to play as much as he's been playing in Vegas. And on offense, I know that they gave up Paul Stastny for the cap reasons, but the offense is still good enough. Max Pacioretty, Jonathan Marchessault, William Karlsson, Riley Smith, Mark Stone finally being named captain. It's a really good forward core, too. Overall, though, their defense I'd probably say is better than Colorado. Their offense I'd give to Colorado being better. But that goaltending is just so much better. And I really think that Robin Lehner will be a Stanley Cup champion in his career with Vegas. Whether it's this year or the next 2 years, it's phenomenal how good Robin Lehner is. And now moving on to number 1, the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Tampa Bay Lightning. So, Tampa, they win the cup. And their biggest loss is Kucherov is out for the year. And it is huge. But their team is good enough that they can absorb the blow of losing Kucherov. They lost Stamkos in the playoffs and they won the cup. So you're replacing Kucherov with Steven Stamkos, which, yes, that is a drop-off, but you won the cup without Stamkos. It's not like you barely made the playoffs without Stamkos. And blue line with Victor Hedman, who is a Norris finalist pretty much every year. Ryan McDonough, who, whenever Hedman gets hurt, always gets in the conversation for the Norris, and then gets forgotten when Hedman comes back. And Mikhail Sergachev, who should be taking the next step forward in his development. You can't count out this team at all. Defense is amazing. Goaltending is one of the best goalies in the NHL. And they have by far the best forwards and forward depth in the NHL. Or guys like Tyler Johnson and Alex Killorn, who I think could be top 6 players on most teams, are bottom 6 for them and are expendable. And just from top to bottom, there is so much good with the team, and there is no other team that can absorb a blow like a Kucherov or a Stamkos and still go on to have success like they will. So, one last thing I want to talk about in this video, though. So, you see I have the teams. You probably noticed throughout the video, I have a couple awards listed down here. And I'm going to predict what players will win each award. Starting with the Vezina, I think that Jacob Markstrom will win the Vezina trophy. And I know that it is a bit fast to say, all right, he'll go on a new team, he'll be phenomenal, and he'll win the Norris. He'll win the Vezina. But he could. Calgary looked like that they were taking a step back last year, and if he can put up phenomenal numbers and put them 4th in the NHL like I think he will, he'll deserve that Vezina trophy. And he will definitely win one in his career, whether it's this year, next year, year after. But I really think that this is the year that Jacob Markstrom will take that step to be a Vezina winner. Going on to the Norris Trophy, I don't think he got enough credit in St. Louis. Alex Pietrangelo. Again, he's in a new place. But I really think that Pietrangelo in Vegas will give him that recognition he needs, and he'll have a better team with him. And in St. Louis, he didn't get a lot of recognition. He got a lot of recognition from St. Louis fans, but I almost never heard about Pietrangelo getting praised in just general top NHL players. and he really deserves it. And in Vegas, there's not many bigger spotlights in there. Moving on to the Richard, it's Ovi's again. I really can't see anyone taking over, and I've heard a lot of Austin Matthews this year. I don't see it. And if he does win it, though, that'll be phenomenal for him, and it'll be very weird to see someone not Ovechkin win this trophy, unless if Ovi gets hurt. But it'll be very weird and very interesting to see. I really cannot see Ovi losing it this year, but I do think that this could be his final year, and then there'll be a bunch of players up in the air for who could win it after that. Going on to the Calder Trophy. I might be a little biased on this one. I have Igor Shesterkin, the Rangers goalie. If the Rangers can make the playoffs and he has phenomenal stats, that could be what wins him the Calder Trophy. Because the Rangers weren't making the playoffs with Lundqvist any of those years, and the team's barely changed since last year. And they had a phenomenal record with Shesterkin. And Shesterkin only played in the one play-in. They couldn't win in the play-ins with Lundqvist. So, new face in net, and then they make the playoffs. And I know they made other additions, like I mentioned before. It could really win him that Calder Trophy as best rookie. Moving on to the Lady Byng Trophy, I have Braden Point. So the Lady Byng is the Gentlemanly Player Award, but for the most part, it really is the best player that doesn't win another award, that doesn't take a lot of penalties. Last year was McKinnon. And I really think that Braden Point will have a phenomenal season playing with Stamkos this year. And I could really see him. If it was an 82-game season, I think he would cross 100 points this year. And he's just such a phenomenal player whenever I watch him. And his game is amazing. Moving on to the Selke Trophy, I have Sean Couturier. Sean Couturier won it last year for Philly. And sorry. And he's always phenomenal defensively. And you can never count him out for this trophy. But the big thing is Philly's finally good. And this used to be the Bergeron Trophy. I could see it being the Couturier Trophy right now. And there's no signs to say he's slowing down defensively or he's slowing down at all. It's his trophy from now on, I think. And it'll take some phenomenal player. I could see Mark Stone possibly taking it. One of those two. Or maybe Ryan O'Reilly. If St. Louis does surprise people and is even better than I expect them to be. But for my money, it's Sean Couturier. And now, for the Hart Trophy, the Art Rush Trophy, and the Ted Lindsay Trophy, I have the same player, which is McDavid. If Edmonton succeeds, it's on the back of McDavid and Draisaitl. Last year, all these awards went to Draisaitl. There's no question McDavid's a better player, though, especially defensively. And McDavid has been starting to not get as much credit as he deserves. I've been hearing people say McKinnon's a better player than him, or I've even heard Draisaitl's better than him, which just isn't true. And McDavid is the best player in the NHL, and there's no question about that. And I really think that he will take a step forward. And if this was an 82-game season, I could see him possibly putting up near 150 points. He's that good. That he is that next generational, like, breaking record scoring player. Granted, he'll never break Gretzky's records, but of the modern age of hockey, he can be that high-end scorer. So, and the final thing that I wanted to note in this video is which teams are the playoff teams. So I have Minnesota Wild, Columbus Blue Jackets, Boston Bruins, Edmonton Oilers, Vancouver Canucks, New York Rangers, Dallas Stars, Toronto Maple Leafs, Carolina Hurricanes, St. Louis Blues, Washington Capitals, Philadelphia Flyers, Calgary Flames, Colorado Avalanche, Vegas Golden Knights, and Tampa Bay Lightning. So, these are my standings, and I'd be very interested to hear what you guys think. This is obviously the biggest video of the year, and I made this list before the regular season started, and I promised myself that I wouldn't change anything on the list. So, while there are some things that I probably would change around after the first 3 games of the season, I told myself I would hold off. So, thank you guys for watching this video. And I will continue my season preview series next. I just really wanted to get this out before the regular season really got underway. And the season previews, once the season hits like the quarter mark, though, I don't think I'll do them anymore because they're not really previews anymore. We've seen how good the teams are. So thank you for watching. Like and subscribe if you liked it. And let me know what you think about your standings predictions. Whether it's 1 to 31, your playoff teams, or any of that. I'd be very interested to see it. So thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.